the Leeward Community College, the Waianae Moku, located in Ma'ili of the Waianae Moku. And it is August 7th. And this is the second of our Kūkulu Lecture series, which features the Kūkulu of Mauna a Wakea and the Kūkulu that rose up from Waianae, other places on the island, other places within our archipelago, and around the world. So this here is our legal panel. We kept it short intentionally so that we could have a good discussion. Unfortunately, we're starting a little bit late, so it won't be as lengthy as we would appreciate. But before we get started, it was through an invitation by Auntie Pua Case through Mahina Paishan Duarte. So we do want to thank them for offering the Waianae community opportunity to have our Kūkulu photo exhibition, as well as this lecture series that we've added to the exhibition. At this time, we're going to have 2449. We are going to have Auntie Pua say a couple words for us as soon as we resolve some of our technical challenges that we still seem to have. But while we do have us here, we have Shelly Muneoka, who is going to be our facilitator. We have Bianca Isaki, who's an attorney, a well-known attorney as well. And then we also have our Pōkā Laenui from Waianae, who leans more towards our sovereign independence that has never left us. So he continues in that manner. And in the room, but not physically, thank you to Zoom, we will have Marti Townsend, who is currently with Earth Justice, but also has experience and history with the Sierra Club and especially Kahea. Kahea is the first entity that brought Mauna a Wakea to my attention, and I think to most of our attention. And so we have actually 4 of the main players that were part of that. And we also had Miwa that was part of the beginnings of Kahea. So we're very thankful for them. And again, we want to thank Leeward Community College. That would be Danny Wyatt, who is our facilities host, and Janai Kili'ikuli, who makes this part of an educational awareness for our community and for everybody else that's out there. Because we know that we don't all fit in one room, and so we're thankful for digital technology that allows us to all be together. And so I'm going to give the mic to Shelly, and we're going to go ahead and have Auntie Pua share at this time. Mahalo.
All right, well, while Oren's getting that queued up for us, we want to mahalo Auntie Kapua and Auntie Lucy, Danny, Janai for the invitation to be here tonight, and also to Auntie Pua Case for her vision and for this exhibit, Kūkulu, about being a pillar in your community. And one of the things that always helped guide us doing this work was the Mauna itself. Part of the reason why this mountain is so special to us is because it's the tallest mountain all the way from the bottom of the ocean to the top of the summit, and we've really needed a wide base to make us successful, and that's taken many years and many rooms just like this one that we're sitting in right now, small groups talking to each other, making connections to the issue and to each other. So really appreciate Auntie Pua's vision. Oh. Okay, and I think we're going to turn it over to Auntie Pua now.
Maunakea Education and Awareness extends a sincere mahalo to the Waianae community members, na Kia'i, na Kūkulu, the protectors and pillars, and to Leeward Community College for accepting the invitation to host this display entitled Pūlama ya Waianae, a photographic collection of Waianae's history and ongoing efforts to protect and steward the Waianae Moku. May this exhibit and the accompanying presentations, as well as the present exhibits on Hawaii Island, in California, and in New York, serve to encourage, inspire, and activate our people to rise up, speak up, and stand up always for Maunakea and all sacred, storied, and special places in and beyond Hawaii. E nā kūkulu, aloha āina, e hu e, hu.
Okay, we're live again. So it's done.
I think, well, I wish we could have you here in person. That would be really nice. We're gonna, Oren is gonna work on getting Marty up on the screen here. But before we get going with her, I guess maybe we can just start with some introductions. I'm Shelly Muneoka, board member at Kahea. And today we're gonna look back a little bit. Go a little bit behind the headlines as Auntie Lucy invited us to do tonight. In the era that we're talking about, I was the outreach coordinator at Kahea, so I got to visit with a lot of communities and talk about this issue. And yeah, I'll hand it over to Bianca to introduce herself.
Aloha, I'm Bianca Isaki. Now I am Kahea's Maunakea legal director, part-time-ish, but and before that I was a volunteer board member, volunteer intern, going back to about 2010 or so.
Aloha, I'm Pōkā Laenui, and I'm a local attorney, having been here since over the last 50 years, I think. I continue to practice law, and I have been involved in the sovereignty and independence movement, as well as many other movements over the years. And I expect I will be making commentaries on the particular Maunakea events, as well as maybe giving some overview of some other activities that I have been involved in. Thank you.
I don't think we have Marty up just yet, but maybe we can have her introduce herself a little bit later. To get us started, well, let me ask, did you already play that video? Not yet. I didn't play the video yet. Okay, that didn't happen yet. Okay, so what I'm hoping we can do today is have Bianca and Marty give a little bit of overview, looking back at some of the legal cases that led up to the 2015 and then the 2019 direct actions on the Mauna. And then hopefully we can hear from Pōkā, maybe some reflections from his long career in defending land in Hawaii, and maybe, yeah, kind of what the Maunakea moment looked like from his vantage. So if it's okay, I'll turn it over to you, Bianca, now to talk a little bit.
Thank you. Mahalo, Shelly. So I think it's important to go back a little because whenever we deal with a lot of the legal issues, the tendency tends to be like, oh, you know, not to give context to like why things are the way, why are we dealing with these comprehensive plans? Why are we fighting this particular battle? And so I'll just start back with like 1968 when the state leased the State Land Board issued a general lease to the University of Hawaii to build an observatory on Maunakea. After that time, of course, there's more telescopes were being built. There was also there was not a lot of regulation even of that. And some people from Sierra Club and also from Maunakea and Āina, they would complain because there was so much rubbish. They saw like empty oil drums and all this rubbish. And one of them, Nelson Ho, went around and grabbed some of the rubbish, especially rubbish that had the observatory's names on it, put it in a backpack and brought it to, I don't know if it was a land board or somebody, but that ended up making it into one of the many state auditor reports, including, I think that might have been like the 1998 one. And so, and one of the ways that the state thought, well, okay, we can deal with this, we'll make sure that they have to make rules. UH has to make rules about how people are using this land. And so that's why later on, say in 2019, there was UH came up and had all those rulemaking hearings across the state, and everybody had to come forward and be like, why are you making these rules governing how people are using, especially cultural practitioners are using the land, imposing all of these restrictions. So just to give so that's just an example of like some background of like what something that came out of like kind of a common sense don't litter became this kind of protracted battle around like what kind of rules are going to go on at Maunakea. That kind of continued to go on even afterwards because those rules, they deferred the whole question of like cultural practitioner access and use and said, oh, well, we're going to deal with that when we do our comprehensive management plan, when we do our update. And that was, so in 2022, they did the update. Still isn't in there, even though it's also in the rules. And then we ended up litigating on that on behalf of your guest last week or the couple weeks before, Laulani Teal, because they still didn't deal with cultural practitioner access. So these things they go on for decades, and so it's just like we make a move, we complain about litter, then they say, okay, we gotta make rules, and they make rules, and they say, well, we'll defer to another plan, and then we challenge the plan, and so it's constantly evolving that way. Going back a little bit, back to 2007, or the whole reason why there even is a comprehensive management plan for Maunakea. So Maunakea, Maunakea and Āina, Royal Order, Sierra Club, and I think Kuching was also part of this too. Back in the earlier 2000s, they challenged there was NASA was proposing the Keck outriggers for Maunakea, and they got some attorneys, Leah Hong and Bill Tam, I think who became a water deputy later. They challenged them in court. The court ordered an EIS. At one point, it was at the Third Circuit, which is in Hawaii Island, and Judge Hara said, well, you know what, one thing you're missing here that you need to have in order to put these telescopes up here is you have to have a comprehensive management plan. You have all these telescopes that keep coming up, want a comprehensive, not just like one plan for each telescope. So that's where the requirement for this comprehensive management plan came out of. And this was something that came out in 2009. And we, Kahea, Maunakea and Āina, Kuching, a bunch of people, Paul Neves, Debbie Ward, we all challenged the comprehensive management plan for many things, including it wasn't going to consider the 30-meter telescope, which we kind of knew was coming down the pipe because they had done an EIS. So in 2012, I think we ended up getting to court or to the appellate courts, which is the Intermediate Court of Appeals. At that point, the judge, I think the lead judge there was Judge Daniel Foley, but they ruled in a non-precedent opinion, like a memorandum opinion. They said, well, you know, that plan, it doesn't really do anything. It's kind of a plan to plan. Marti Townsend argued that case, so hopefully she can talk a little more about that. I guess getting a little more up to date, there was in 2013 or 2011, we also were doing the contested case against the TMT the first time, the TMT permit, which is applied for by the University of Hawaii. There's so much behind the scenes in that one. I think that Shelly and Marty could probably share some stories. one of my favorite moments, I think, was when, I was learning. I was an intern at the time, and like Marty didn't always litigate. So during the evidentiary portion of this contested case, one of the three things we had to talk about was to show traditional customary use of Maunakea was you're Hawaiian, you practice here, and these lands are undeveloped. So we were, we focused on like, what are the practices? How are they being impacted? The meaty one. We didn't focus so much on like our Kuching, Ke Aloha Pishiota, Kumu Paul Nevis, like Kalani Flores, Pua Case, are they Kanaka Maoli? We didn't focus on that so much. So during the hearings, like what happened was the other side, or University of Hawaii, was like, oh yeah, obvious, don't worry about it. You don't have to get that on record. So we didn't. And then later on, they tried to say, well, you didn't quite make that first factor of establishing that your clients are Kanaka Maoli. So during oral arguments, which isn't evidentiary, but we're still making oral arguments, Kuching comes out with his genealogy, long genealogy written up like on this long piece of paper, and he starts going through it. At one point he points out, he says, oh, and Chairman William Ila, this is where we have the same people in common. So that was awesome. And I've never seen that argument come up again in any of these Maunakea cases. But maybe to you or Marty, or sorry.
Oh, is Marty on?
Marty, we can't hear her, but we can hear her when I bring you over to the mic. So just she can speak into the mic there. Okay, go ahead, Marty. Marty,
sorry, Marty, are you ready to respond to this? I don't know if you can even. I don't know how this works. Hi. Could you hear Bianca's comments about the first contested case about the CDUP?
Yeah, I missed the last few words that she just said when we were walking over.
So. She was just talking
about the cultural practices and how the BLNR was basically trying to deny that Native Hawaiians were engaging in cultural practice on the summit. Is that right?
Kind of. She was telling this awesome moment when they tried to make an argument that the petitioners were not Kanaka Maoli, and Uncle Ku busted out his genealogy and pointed out his long genealogy, as well as how William Ila, who was the decision maker at that point, also tied into that same genealogy, which is pretty classic.
Yeah, that was awesome. Yes.
Did you want to share any of your own reflections or favorite moments or cool stories like the one that Bianca just shared about that?
Well, first, I really want to appreciate Bianca for having such an excellent memory. That was a really good recitation of the state of the case at the time. I had kind of forgotten some of the twists and turns. They were so tight and quick that it was a blur in some ways. So it was good to kind of walk back through all the shenanigans, basically, that the government put us through at that time. Telling us that, there's no actual cultural practice happening on the Mauna anymore, that the petitioners aren't actually Native Hawaiian. Some of that stuff was really quite egregious.
Offensive?
And when talking about, I remember, Auntie Debbie Ward, engaging in a contested case hearing, the first one, and, all of us were very new. Bianca was an intern. That is a very important detail, but for her bike and her, athletic ability, we would not have made our filing on time with our huge stacks of paper all spread out all over the floor and trying to organize all of our exhibits. I was a very young attorney fresh out of law school, and, the petitioners, all this, not lawyers, and we were all doing our best to represent the interests of Maunakea, and, perpetuating cultural practice and preventing the industrialization of the Mauna. Anyway, I just really appreciated Auntie Debbie, who, learned how to cross-examine someone and actually, in order to participate in this contested case, really went beyond her own comfort level to be able to make a really strong case for protecting the natural resources up there. You know, oftentimes people frame Maunakea as desolate and a desert. There's nothing up there. But Auntie Debbie is a conservationist and, you know, a profound lover of the environment. And she was able to get onto the record, you know, the details of all of the, you know, really interesting and unique flora and fauna that have evolved to live on Maunakea. I wanted to just highlight how, you know, we didn't, it's not like we were all experts at this at the time, right? We were just sort of, you know, trying to rise to the occasion. And I think that's something to keep in mind, because I often hear you people talking about how, well, you know, I don't know how to do that. And, you know, that sounds hard and those sorts of things. And I think it's important to, you know, recognize those feelings in yourself, like you're about to take on a huge challenge, but also at the same time, don't let those concerns prevent you from doing what you think is necessary to, in the best interest of yourself and the things that you care about, your natural and cultural resources. I don't know. I mean, I remember, I was trying to think back of the first time I heard about the TMT. I was thinking about, I think I heard about it at a hearing for the Pan-STARRS telescope that was proposed for Maunakea. This is a telescope to identify asteroids that might impact Earth. And at a public hearing for the EIS on that telescope, the idea of a 30-meter telescope, which is so huge, and we should have another panel to talk about like some of the double entendres and innuendos of, like, you know, the always having to have the biggest thing on the mountain. Anyway, I heard about it in 2007 at a hearing for the Pan-STARRS telescope, which the Pan-STARRS telescope did not get built on Maunakea. You know, I think in a lot of ways, the astronomy community put their support behind the TMT. And I just remember at the time, when we first heard about it, telling people, like, this is a really horrible idea, and people are not going to be okay with this. And they shrugged us off. You know, it's like we warned them that there would be strong community opposition to such a massive industrial structure being put on the northern plateau of Maunakea. I think, I don't know if there are other reflections that you guys are looking for. I appreciated Bianca's story about the trash. I remember trying to keep track of that trash as exhibits, you know, like I had the actual trash in a trash bag in my office and just trying to constantly tell people to not throw away this trash. This is special trash, like constantly labeling the bags and like taking photos of it and trying to, like, how did we get it in exhibits? That was always fun. I remember, you know, one of the things that really touched me, as, you know, this being my first, like significant case that I was involved in, and just all of the effort that we all put into, you know, so many phone calls. This is pre-Zoom. We would all like do daisy chain merge calls with all of us on Oahu and on Hawaii Island, all over Hawaii Island, and you know, trying to edit the Google Doc all together at the same time, and, you know, get all of the filings together, and like you know, it was the first time I ever prayed over a filing, which I felt was really, really important and appropriate. It was a very meaningful and moving experience for me, and I'm just so grateful that I had an opportunity to help in the effort.
Mahalo, Marti. That was awesome. Thank you for, maybe Bianca's gonna hold Marti for us. No, thank you for taking us back to that moment, because I think it's easy to forget how new we all were. And like, I always think about how right now, you know, we don't know what the next like Maunakea is going to be. We don't know what the next big issue is going to be. And just looking back, you know, that we didn't know what was going to come, what was to come. And it really was like a David and Goliath situation, and it still is. Like, I mean, I remember, I think it was John Osorio that gave the reflection that he was like, you know, we're running off of like sweetbread money. Like, we are like hustling for dollars. Like, I remember like begging, you know, trying to get funding just for flights for us to get to the court hearing, which was on Hawaii Island, you know, and like our guys sleeping in their car, like driving far to get to the hearing and sleeping overnight, and, you know, and then seeing the UH attorneys in first class. It was kind of sickening, you know, just, this is like nothing to them, you know. And
remember how much they tried to charge us thousands of dollars for the transcripts?
yes.
And then so we would like sit there in the BLNR, you know, back offices in the guts of the government buildings and be photographing transcripts so you wouldn't have to pay for them to be photographed. Yeah.
It's allowed. It's allowed.
Okay. Our attorney said it was allowed. I was going to say, don't say that.
It's okay. It was totally by permission. Yeah, we had to work out a special deal with the court reporter because there was just no way that the petitioners could afford the transcripts the transcript fees that they were imposing on us. When really it's a public document and it should have been shared with everybody, which eventually it was.
That's what I think is so cool about the newness of our team, the somewhat naivete that we're still like, no, but it should be free because it is a public document. Like we hadn't been jaded yet over like, but they always charge. They all, you know, we hadn't like been resigned to how it like always is yet. And I think that like really got us far because we're like, but wait, it's just like a plain reading of the, you know, the 8 criteria or whatever, you know.
The childlike expectations, right? Like a wonder and respect for the letter of the law. And we were like, but this is what it says, and you're not doing that.
And we shouldn't let go of that because look how far it got us. It's hard to keep that going when you've been in it for a long time. But yeah, I do think
that's why young people are so important. That's why it's so important to always have a shadow and work with as many young people as you can because they are the ones who are constantly asking questions and seeing things from ways that you, as an older person who have done this once or twice, maybe not be seeing it, and they are able to keep that fire going in others, right? That fire of expectation that our government's actually here to serve our shared best interests.
I just want to pick up on Marty's point about, like, we were new to this and that other people can do it. Like, okay, so I just want to talk about how we didn't really have a scanner and our Xerox machine, like the ink's so expensive. Rico, oh, we hated it. So her sister, who is the office manager who just like everything, she was like, well, what we can do is we can get the ink, make a paper cone, refill up the Xerox machine thing, and then for the printer. And so we made, because we had to make hundreds and maybe thousands of copies. And the other thing we did was Miwa Tamahana, who was our executive director, her parents had an old scanner and had been kept in their garage. So we needed the scanner because we had all the exhibits. And then anyway, so she gave it to us filled with ants. But it's the only thing that we had ants and eggs. So me, Shelly, and Lauren, we spread out a big piece of paper on the ground outside of the office, shaking it out and trying to get all the ant eggs out, getting the ants and trying to hide it before any of the building supervisors saw us. But that's how we had had an extended life of our printer, and we got a scanner. And Auntie Deb donated a lot of stuff. It was so critical because we had to have these copies. I don't know how many copies we had to get for BLNR and the other side, and it's hundreds and over thousands of dollars if you don't do it this way.
I just want to say, this speaks to the importance of funding grassroots efforts. Thank heavens for Hawaii People's Fund, because they were the only ones who were funding us at that point on this particular issue. And, thank goodness that we had their funding. It was enough to, get us plane tickets and to get the real fundamentals covered. But yeah, shoestrings and sweep bed, that's what it took for us to get the first Maunakea contested case hearing off the ground. And what a success it was, that paper airplane. Holy moly.
Another pro tip for everybody else who's struggling with their printer, there's a little indicator that's trying to tell it that there's no ink, but you can cover it. Cover the thing that's saying there's no ink, and it will keep going for a little while. Just as another pro tip. Yep, we did that. And before I turn it over to Uncle Pōkā, mahalo for letting us just, go all over. But just on the Marty's comment about grassroots funding, as some of you may recall, Kahea went through a really stressful experience of this scrutiny by the Attorney General, which unfortunately never really has like an official end. It's been years now. It's not like they're like, okay, we're done now. But that was a super, super stressful experience. And part of that was we didn't get to thank people in the way that we wanted to because of the extra scrutiny that was on us. But I just wanted to mention here on the topic of grassroots funding that it was so moving. Like, we had somebody send us in 5 $1 bills in an envelope. Like, we had people, selling mochi, making garage sale, like, we had people donate their services, their professional services. We had people, chefs, getting together and organizing to, donate the proceeds from an evening of cooking. Or we had musicians. We had, it was amazing and it was really beautiful. At that point, we weren't sure who we were going to get in trouble. If we were going to get them in trouble, we didn't want to, put out a list of all the mahalos and that be who they cut and paste to go hunt down and make trouble to. So, we never really got to say thank you in the way that we wanted to. So just wanted to take that chance now. But now I wanted to turn over. Well, we're going to lose Bianca in a little bit. So wanted to be able to, if you guys could have conversation if Bianca's still here. But Uncle Pōkā has been working on different sovereignty issues and land protection issues in Hawaii, he said, for I think over 50 years. So we're hoping that we could get some of his perspectives on this, particular issue, Maunakea, but also just reflecting on his own participation and all the wisdom that is inside of that. Yeah. Mahalo.
I don't know how much wisdom you're going to get, but I take... Well, yeah, I take from the term kūkulu, meaning to build. And so I want to cover maybe some of the foundation of movements in Hawaii and grassroots movement. I started my involvement in actually 1971, 72, when I was in the U.S. military. And it was at that time that I discovered Queen Liliuokalani's story, Hawaii's story, while I was in the Air Force at Hickam Air Force Base. And having read that, it provided me with a foundation. Look at what really happened in Hawaii. And I was with a uniform, wearing the American uniform, and asking myself, what the hell am I doing in their military that overthrew my government? And at that time, I became very angry and wanted to kill Americans, burn buildings, and just get the Americans out of Hawaii. But I decided that I would get caught. I would not be able to move the whole progression of Hawaii development any further. And so I decided that I would instead go to law school, get into the system, and explode the system from the inside with their laws, with justice, with history. And so that had been my attempt to do so. I was able to get into the University of Hawaii Law School in the first class, graduated in 1976, came out to Waianae to practice law here, and within a year was able to represent or get attention to be able to represent the issues that I wanted to raise. And that was when the federal government and the state government was trying to prosecute the reputed underworld leader of Hawaii. His name was Napi Pūlama. And so you had all of the forces coming down, the strike force coming down and trying to jail this Hawaiian for the rest of his life on a double murder, double kidnap charge. And I had been a new attorney, but I got a telephone call requesting that I step in and represent Napi Pūlama. So that became an opportunity to raise the issue of the overthrow of our Hawaiian government and the fact that in essence, what we have is a situation of thieves sitting in judgment of themselves, challenging the American court system of their jurisdiction. So when he was charged with double murder and double kidnap, I responded on his behalf and said that we refuse to dignify this court by simply answering to its charges. Instead, we ask, who are you foreigners to come into Hawaii and charge us by your foreign laws? And that is the essence of how I see that particular case and all the other land cases and individual criminal cases and the rest. Who are you foreigners to come in and impose your foreign laws over us? We all know the story of there was no treaty, there was no legitimacy. It was an aggressive act in 1893. And the United Nations, as far as the United Nations has said, any initial act of aggression upon a territory cannot justify the continuing holding of that territory. And in 1893, by confession of the U.S. Congress itself, they confessed that they committed an aggression upon Hawaii, and yet they refused to release the nation of Hawaii to our self-determination status. As I look at Maunakea, as I look at Kaho'olawe, as I look at many of the other activities that I have been involved in, and many others, you have a separation of domestic American law and international law. And what we need to do at times is take a wider perspective and look at the international application of laws and how the Americans continue, the judges in the courts continue to ignore their own constitution, ignore the obligation to the United Nations. Article 6 of the U.S. Constitution says that all treaties and executive agreements must be recognized by all judges of every court. And when you point out that the United Nations Charter is a treaty with the United States, and the United States had submitted Hawaii for self-determination back in 1946, and yet we have never had self-determination. And the judges keep closing their eyes to these fundamental issues of the right of the people of Hawaii to govern ourselves. And so I find my responsibility is to continue to remind them that you folks are in essence thieves sitting in judgment of yourself, refusing to submit to the wider or the broader community of the international community, the United Nations. You need to have the issues reconsidered on whether or not statehood was legitimate. Just looking at the question of statehood and why it was not legitimate. The plebiscite that was taken, they cheated on the question of whether or not we wanted to be part of the Union of States of the United States or not. The obligation in that plebiscite was to provide the people who have been colonized with three options: to be to be integrated into the Union, or to be independent, or to be in free association. We were never given that question. So the question itself was a fraudulent question. The second aspect is that who voted in this plebiscite? It's supposed to be the people of Hawaii who had lost our independence. Instead, the Americans allowed their transmigration policy since 1900, overflowing Hawaii with foreigners, making them American citizens. Even the Hawaiians were forced to become American citizens. And then they say, well, all people in Hawaii can vote. All American citizens could vote. So what they did was they altered the definition of self, who were the people to vote, and they limited the question of determination. What were the choices that we had? So it was a double fraud committed against Hawaii, and a double fraud committed against the United Nations General Assembly. So what I'm saying is that the legitimacy that you now claim that you have over Hawaii, with all of your laws, your authorities, your boards and commissions and the rest, are all fraudulent. They do not meet the standards. Even within American law and international law, they do not meet the standards. So I guess I'm a person among many others who constantly remind the courts, as well as the Hawaii public, that what we are living in is based on a fraudulent taking, and so we have to see and pierce through the truth of what is happening to us. So they make up all of their rules, they try to justify themselves, but they do not want to face the underlying issue of that taking. At times I represent criminal defendants, I may represent other cases. I had one case in which they finally discharged my defendant, and the circuit court judge says, after he concluded his session, he said, "Mr. Burgess, you mind stepping back and talking to me for a while?" And so I said, "Sure, I'm happy they released my client." And he says, "You know, there's something that I cannot figure out how to deal with. My daughter tells me, you know, Dad, how can you possibly hold jurisdiction over these Hawaiians when we know that the Americans stole the government? Where is the justification? How can you sit as judge over these questions?" And he says, "And I don't know what to tell my daughter." So he says, "You know, all the protests, the marches, the speeches that you folks give at Iolani Palace or wherever it is, keep it up. We need a solution." If the Americans need a solution, they know the truth of the matter is that they have no legitimacy in Hawaii. But they keep raising this authority and other authorities, passing rules, passing legislation, but avoiding the underlying question of colonization. You know, colonization is very important. It's equivalent to slavery. They are both considered international law. Prohibitions against colonization as well as slavery. And yet they continue with their colonization. So anyway, that's my brief comment. I'm sorry for taking so long. Thank you very much.
Mahalo. I'm like holding Marty next to me. Hi, Marty. I just want to give you a chance. Did you want to respond to anything there?
Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm. We can.
Yeah. So, yeah, I totally agree with everything that Uncle Pōkā Laenui is saying. It's interesting to me that to watch how the offspring date of this colonizing empire effort in Hawaii by the U.S., how it twists and turns and, you know, is writhing in the inconsistency of the state government, right? So I feel like it's like it's an acknowledgement or confession by the state that when the state says, okay, we're going to hold the natural and cultural resources of Hawaii in trust for Native Hawaiians and the people of Hawaii, I feel like that is an acknowledgement that they don't have good title. They've created this idea of holding public trust resources, and protect them from exploitation as an answer to the question of where's your good title. And they can say, well, we don't have one, but don't worry, we'll take good care of all of these resources that we're now in charge of. So I see that as a confession. I also, I recognize that, there's a lot of discussion these days around just the immense amount of corruption that exists in Hawaii's politics. And for me, I see that as just like the natural outgrowth of the very corrupt beginnings of state government in Hawaii. They have always been changing the rules as they go to suit their needs, right? To figure out how to best exploit Hawaii for U.S. interests, whether it be for the military or for capitalism. They, will come up with, unique definitions and, try to challenge the plain reading of whatever the law is, in order to allow for them to exploit it, right? In the case of Maunakea, they would say, well, yeah, it is a conservation district, and it is supposed to be protected against, industrialization. But we made, we created these subzones, and we made special exceptions to allow for the targeted industrialization of Maunakea specifically, right? Because it is excellent for industrial astronomy. And it's hard to get the system to shake it awake and get it to see the internal inconsistency of the way they operate, right? The principal position of the state is that Maunakea is already been set aside for telescope development. It's already been developed a bunch, so putting one more telescope on is not going to be that big of a deal. I don't know why everyone's so mad. And it took them, when the hui of advocates for Maunakea in the early days, would put up on the screen the 8 criteria for protecting a conservation district, and say, and highlight the parts about how, it's basically, not supposed to do any harm, supposed to enhance the natural resources. Like, how does, building this huge structure that goes down several stories into the mountain, as well as going several stories up into the sky, how does that consistent with these 8 criteria? And they would just, they would twist and turn and, put themselves into a pretzel trying to argue how it was okay to build the TMT on Maunakea. And I think that's just, it is but one example of how the state government in Hawaii, is not legitimate and has a hard time being consistent because of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I know I'm supposed to be the moderator. I was gonna, if I can offer one thing that happened recently at the international level. I appreciate what Uncle Pōkā is sharing here, because it is really hard to get the local state government to deal with this underlying issue, as you were saying. And so last month we filed I'm not going to remember the name right now. It was to the Commission on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, yeah. And Kealoha Pishora worked with a group, Cultural Survival, to submit a similar letter in 2019 targeting the U.S. government over their role and in their support of TMT and the degradation of Maunakea. And so about a month ago, we filed one similarly targeting folks in Canada. The Canadian government, Canadian astronomical societies, as well as corporations, because they had made statements like, we will not build TMT in Maunakea without the consent of Native Hawaiians. And I was like, great, because you most definitely don't have it, and it's well documented, and I'm so glad to hear you say that. But then, surprise, surprise, as Marty and Uncle are talking about, they twist and contort. How can they fit into their own definition of what is consent? And they said, oh, look, in 2009, OHA said that they support TMT on Maunakea. And we're like, okay, wait, but in 2015, they rescinded that. But they didn't mention that part. So we got OHA to send that to them and say, hey, you forgot a really key piece of information here, that we rescinded that in 2015. But to our shock, they actually came back and said, oh, no, we know. We actually just don't think that materially changed our statement. We don't think it really matters. And so we're like, okay, so this is the kind of games they play. And we're trying to figure out, where can you find some accountability? Where can we apply pressure? And so that's why we had filed this thing at the UN. So we'll see what comes of it. But sometimes, yes, we do have to go up and out.
ILO convention.
Mm-hmm.
Scoot over, babe.
Come sit close. The ILO convention, the International Labor Organization Convention 169, deals with the specific rights of indigenous peoples and what they should say and what they say. And in that convention is where you should really look at what consultation means and how one obtains the voice of indigenous people. I had been the expert on that commission with the ILO back when it was being drafted, and we had put in some of those clarifying questions of what is consultation, and it has to be informed consultation and consent. Before people can give their consent, it has to be informed. Oftentimes, other government activities will just come in and say, you have consulted. The other question is OHA really the appropriate voice of the people, of the Hawaiian people? And so you have many issues there, and I haven't read the petition, but so I don't know the details. But those are some of the considerations.
Yes.
I think this speaks to the need to be persistent, tenacious, like don't give up. I mean, one of the things I'm taking away from this particular panel and just, all of the conversation around Maunakea since the contested case hearings is like, you have no idea what value your work is going to have in the future, right? Like, oh man, the stuff that we put up on the Kahea website from, 2014 got legs 5 years later and really went far. So I think, just, keep it up, whatever, advocacy that you might be doing around whatever issues are affecting, the quality of your life or your natural resources, don't give up, basically, because it's important to just constantly be raising the issues, like Uncle Pōkā says, always remind the courts, remind the public, remind your neighbors, the state government is kind of questionable here, right? This explains why we're having all these problems. It's like the continuing original sin in the state of Hawaii, and until we deal with the consequences of colonization and empire in Hawaii, I think it will continue to always be a problem. And the other thing I would say is this is why it's important to know your history, right? Like the story that Uncle told about, reading to do, to get closer to justice, right? That's another thing that I'm also meditating on a lot these days is that, at the time that the first contested case hearing was going down on Maunakea, my mindset was we're going to win, like what does it take to win, right? And then I realized, man, even when you win, they steal the win from you, right? So, they do some shenanigans and then you don't win. And you're like, hey, wait a minute, I technically won. And so it's not necessarily about that per se. Justice is a journey, and we're constantly just trying to get closer and closer to justice. And that there is so much that needs to be rectified and accounted for in reparations for all that Hawaiians have suffered under the thumb of empire. And I don't think we should think about any one thing that we're doing as being like, this is going to be the thing that wins it. It's more about our energy that we are putting into standing up for the rights of Native Hawaiians and for standing up for the natural cultural resources of Hawaii is a movement, right? It's an ongoing action, and you just keep adding more energy to it, adding when you're built, that kūkulu, you're building and building, and it's not necessarily that you're getting to any specific endpoint because, there's been so much injustice suffered. It's going to be generations worth of restoration work. So,
let me share 2 comments. You may not think it's apropos. I think it is. A Zen master, when I was being gone after and complained by the federal district court judge, Sam King, and threatened to take my license away because I said that I was not an American citizen. And he challenged how could I practice law in his court, not being an American citizen. But after that, I went up to this Zen dojo, and the headmaster said, come, I'd like to talk to you. He's a local boy from Kalihi. And I said, what? He said, you have to remember that the quest is not to walk the straight path, but to learn to walk the crooked path straight. Okay, that's the first story. You can think about it and what it means. Because I had to think about it as well.
We're living in a very corrupt system. Like the ecosystem that we are living in is polluted with racism, polluted with self-dealing and empire, people stealing stuff, it's all over the place and it's baked in. And so recognizing that we live in an unjust system, how do we figure out how to live in a just and honest way, right? It's very profound.
Okay. The second point I wanted to make is that in the Napi Pūlama case, I had to address the question, how do I show the court that what happened in Hawaii in 1893 was a theft and it was an injustice? And I thought I could introduce Liliuokalani's story, but what would the institutions of government do? They say, it's just one point of view from the Hawaiian side. So I decided, no, I would not use her story. What I would do was use President Cleveland's address to the Joint Houses of Congress, in which he confesses all of these things. And so I read the whole address into the court record.
Nice.
The judge, right now I'm blanking on his name, he said, wow, this is the most fantastic story I have ever heard. Judge Lanham. And he says, I had been a member of the territorial legislature. I have been a member of the state legislature. I'm married to a Hawaiian woman. My children are part Hawaiian. And I have never heard this story before. So it tells me that the story needs to be told and retold and retold. If he had not heard about it, what about our people in our communities who have not heard the story? When I raised those issues back in 1977, there were maybe 3 people who understood those stories. There was my client, my wife, and myself. Today, the Hawaiian sovereignty movement has expanded and extended so wide, but we cannot stop from telling that underlying story, that we are colonized people, equivalent to slaves, equivalent to slavery, in that we do not have our control over our destiny, our self-determination, and we need to repeat that as often as possible. Okay, those were the 2 points I wanted to make. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, just to build on that, I think it's important if someone's going to engage in state legal proceedings of any kind, these like administrative hearings and things like that, to manage expectations. It's not that these bodies, a state court or a state board are not going to be like, oh yeah, you're right, this is all illegal and we should just scratch it and start from the beginning. They are part of the whole charade, right? And so it's more about exposing themselves, exposing their inconsistencies to themselves. I like to think about it as like, we're using the tools that they say are available to us to protect our interests, to just hold the line until sovereignty is restored, and not have this expectation that somehow the state government is going to be able to really properly represent the interests of Native Hawaiians at the end of the day. It's part of the living in a corrupt system that we live in right now, and if we go in with that expectation that we are here to expose, to, force kind of a reflection, like the story that Uncle Pōkā told about the judge is like, holy moly, I've never read President Cleveland's address because we don't teach that in school. And that, just imagine how that had, set, like butterflies' wings flapped, right? And changed the course of that judge's approach to law going forward. Like, that's amazing. It's small, but I think it's also powerful. And it's just, when we go in managing our expectations that way, I think we will experience more success.
Mahalo, Marty. kind of wrapping up on time. I wanted to see if there were any questions in the audience or any reflections from our audience members. I see Auntie Lucy Gay raising her hand here. Bring the microphone to her.
So if I learned anything tonight, it was your statement, Pōkā, that, and Marty's statement, that what's hidden or needs to be brought up public. So, you know, when I think about that, I see education as having a serious, critical, important role. Share with me how you envision education, you know, the entities from preschool all the way up. I don't care where you start, but share with me your vision as to how that can occur. How can we take what's hidden and throw it up into the public so that people have a more complete understanding of what happened?
There are many ways to educate, and what we need to do is take up every opportunity to do so. There was an incident about maybe 30, 40 years ago when a child in elementary school, in kindergarten, when they asked her to stand and say the Pledge of Allegiance to the American flag, she said, "No, I'm not going to stand." The teacher asked, "Why not?" And she said, "Because you folks going to imprison my queen and you stole the nation." Yeah. After that, the next day, she asked the rest of the class to stand and say the Pledge of Allegiance. And Kekoa says, "No, if poor Anna don't have to stand, I ain't standing too." Before it got too far, the whole class just skipped the Pledge of Allegiance. Now you find many of our elementary schools who refuse to do it. And many schools have the flags taken down, the American flags taken down. You cannot find one particular solution to the broad education. I remember in the early days where people couldn't understand what was going on, I went house to house at various meetings, coffee hours, and talked about sovereignty. When I raised the issue in the Napi Pūlama case, I received a telephone call from a guy who says, "Hey brother, you don't know me, but I'm living at Sand Island, and they're gonna kick us out pretty soon, but I'm very curious. What are you talking about that Cleveland said that they stole the nation?" So I went down to Sand Island and I introduced the Cleveland message to the people there. And as a result, at least 3 half-brothers, Puhipao, Walter Paulo, and Bobby Henriquez, said, "Okay, we're going to stand on the basis of sovereignty." So that moved us to the next step of demanding a jury trial, because I see that the jury is 12 more people that I can get a story to. They didn't give us a jury trial because they changed the law in the meantime. They downgraded the offense, so I lost my jury trial. But I could argue to the judge, one person. And the judge tells me as I filed a motion to dismiss on the basis that they have no jurisdiction over our people. He says, "Mr. Burgess," and I had known him previously, he says, "Mr. Burgess, I know the Hawaiian history, so you need not go through all of that." So I tell him, "You may know it, but I have a right to make my record and send it up to the appellate courts." He said, "Well, that's true, so go ahead and make your record." So I lay out the history of the overthrow, the illegalities, I bring in international legal principles and all that stuff. Then he says, "Well, whatever you say, I have to dismiss the case and move it down to the district court and let the trial proceed there." So we lost that opportunity. But one day I see this judge walking down the street, and he says, "Hey, can I talk to you for a minute?" I said, "Sure, what do you like to talk about?" He said, "You know, when you argued that, I thought I knew the Hawaiian history, and I learned a lot by your argument." One person, and his influence in the community is large. So whether we talk to one person or many people, whether or not we have to mimeograph papers and letters. Napi Pūlama writes a letter from his cave when he was in jail in the federal court. And he talks to the Hawaiian people. that we have to understand our history. We have to be proud of who we are. Just by handing out his letters, we were able to communicate with a lot of people. So, is there a solution on educating the public? I tried for about 15 years on radio, on talk radio and all that stuff. There are opportunities, many opportunities that we need to grab hold of. There's no singular way. If you talk to one person or you talk to 1,000, take that opportunity to educate, continually educate. That is our task. So today, from 3 people back in 1977 to today, there are thousands who are demanding their sovereignty. And we need to continue with that education process and advocacy.
Mahalo, Uncle. Oh, okay. We have a question from Auntie. You think so? No? Okay, here, I'll bring it to you.
Well, you know, this is probably not the contested case or what we're talking about, but what kind of concerns me is like for the Mauna, and you know, part of our purpose of having these exhibition, the photo exhibition and these lecture series, is that we want to keep the people informed. You know, where are we at today? So what also concerns me is about having our āina Aloha economic futures. You know, because there was an early statement about the Mauna that, you know, and any time to me you have the Mauna and economics, it's a conflict, or all of our āina is economics to this fake state. So it's like this entity, as good as, you know, many of the people are, I think whenever we put that economics out there, even though we have āina Aloha economics futures, it's like, well, the economics should not be a play. You know, why is the economics a play? But that's what corrupts our people. I mean, and to me, for our Kanaka that get busted in that corruption, I feel so bad for them, because it's not in our DNA to be corrupt. So we need to stay out of that and let all these other foreigners, these other settlers, get caught up in that web, and we just try and stay pono. The other thing that concerns me is also the new Maunakea authority. You know, how is that going to affect us? Because, you know, like the UH and the state says, it's like, well, to get consent from the Hawaiians. You know, are we creating entities and then putting individuals that will give consent, and then they say this is the Hawaiian consent? You know, so when we create entities, whenever you have been appointed by government, I challenge that, because they need to come up from the bottom. Let the people say who's going to represent us, not the legislature, not the governor, not BLNR, not those entities that put the fake states' needs before the Hawaiian people, because this is still the Hawaiian kingdom. You know, and so while we are biding our time until we get people informed about what is the way, as Pōkā has shared, you know, through the president's message at that time. And, you know, it's sad to say his failure to enact and fulfill the intent of that message. That what also put us here. But let's not ourselves get caught up in that web and be manipulated and used to give a consent that we really don't feel is right. And, you know, to all of those that are American patriots, you know, you be who you are. And those of us who know who we are, because we never left who we are. But it's through the disinformation, and I forget that other word, indoctrination, the American indoctrination, that we don't know, or some people still don't know who they are. So we try to help to bring them along through these talking series. And so we welcome people to come and engage in these conversations. Mahalo, babe.
Mahalo, Auntie. Is there anybody else that in the audience that wanted to speak or have a question?
Do the attorneys have any response to this?
You only one now. Well, Marty is still on the line. One word that comes to mind is the word nationalization. Upon independence, we still have the option of nationalization. Every country has the right to control its territory. And if an independent nation of Hawaii says, you know, we really got screwed while the Americans were here making all their laws and changing our land, our environment, all of these things, we have the right to nationalize lands. We have the right, essentially, to take back. That is inherent in every nation's control over their territory. So while I get depressed looking at the details of how they continue to ruin the sanctity of land here in Hawaii, I keep remembering that there is the possibility of nationalization, not meaning that we're going to take everybody's land, but we can make those changes as necessary. It's important that we become the prophets of our future, that we begin to look into the future and ask ourselves, how are we going to adjust here? How are we going to change there? And try to promote our answers. Now, it may not be that our answers will be the answer, but at least we begin the thinking, and others can join in the prophesizing of our future. Okay, that's it.
Yeah, I think it's so beautiful to engage in the visioning necessary to, plot the course towards where we want to be. And the dreaming of the future is a really important step, and it's probably the funnest step of the whole thing. I had so many thoughts listening to what everyone has been saying. I think, on the question of education, I think it's really important for us to be intentional about ensuring that we ourselves are always open to being educated and learning more. It's definitely a two-way street, right? We should go out with the intent of educating people, the way Uncle Pōkā talked about, you go door to door, one-on-one, especially in this age where people can't quite tell what's true on social media and on, mainstream media, and are they, slanting things or, giving us, not the full story. When you have conversations one-on-one with people that you know and can trust and can follow up with, I think that helps to, build a stronger foundation for the things that we know. And that, in terms of how do we rectify things? I think it's important for us to come up with, as we're visioning for the future, new ways of handling things like corruption and violations of the rules, right? We are, a lot of people are twisted up because they have been, living in this, corrupt system and polluted waters, and they don't, may not always be aware of it, but as soon as they do become aware of it and are, want to make right, I think we should, as a people, be open to reconciliation and finding less punitive ways of solving problems where, people violate our trust, and to be real fair-minded about how we apply that expectation, right? It should apply equally, right? And so, I feel like there's a lot of settlers who get away with things that I think would be corrupt if Hawaiians were in charge. And, because of racism and colonization, the tables are turned, and there's a lot of crime that people get away with. It's just framed as being okay. So anyway, I look forward to a future in Hawaii where, we are able to come up with a more reconciliatory way of dealing with those kinds of trust issues. And And in the end, the question of consent, like it's got to be continuing consent and genuine consent from everyone who is directly affected. That's a hard thing to accomplish, but it's definitely the only way to truly move forward in a collaborative way. Otherwise, there's always going to be some element of force involved, and nothing good comes when it's forced. Yeah, I think the best we can do right now is to keep a very close eye on these entities and recognize that when people rise up together in a collective voice all at once, it really does make a difference. And so that if there's any more shenanigans that come out of any of these efforts, if we all stick together and maintain high standards, I think we can keep them honest.
Mahalo, Marty. I think we're just about wrapping up here. I'm going to turn it back over to Auntie Kapua for her closing message. Mahalo.
Want to mahalo both of you, and also Bianca, who had to leave us already. And we had some ugly traffic, so that didn't help us on getting started earlier. And plus, Marty just returned home from a neighbor island trip, so that's why she's not here, because we prefer to have our panelists here when at all possible. So even Shelly them got caught up, and Lucy from Kaneohe with these ugly traffic. But so I want to thank you folks, especially Pōkā. Thank you so much for having that independence, that we are still sovereign conversation way back in the 70s. I remember my mom them getting engaged with you, Jermaine and Joe Kili'ikua. So yes, thank you for that and keeping it going, because we have so many people now that are aware, and people that are still learning, because sometimes it's an uncomfortable position that you get put in when you're kind of enlightened. Yeah, so it takes a while to kind of get ingrained. But coming back to our Kūkulu exhibition, our next panel will be our vanguards and our kia'i. So after having the initial information with the film, Temple Under Siege, and with Laulani, and having some legal discussion with our panelists and the information that has been shared, next one is the vanguards and the kia'i. And we're going to be looking forward to Lanakila, who will be on island at that time. And so he was one of those that was a kia'i that started it way back when. I think as far as getting physically, we will stop it. So what happens in the courts happens in the courts. But what happens on the Mauna, that's dependent upon us as well. So we do have him. We also have Andre Perez, who is very instrumental with organizing a lot of the movement and coordinating the donations that were up there. We're also going to have Candace Fuji Kane, who's kahea and excellent. She calls herself as a settler. I mean, she's been so supportive to enlightening people and exposing us to the truth. And so she's very welcome, always welcome here. And then we're also going to have our own Po'okumu, Kalehua Krug, who is Po'okumu of Kawaihona o Kana'awao. He's also a musician, Olelo Hawaii immersion, Olelo and all things Hawaii, as well as Tatau practitioner, and so much more. So we are going to have those four, if they are able to meet their schedules, as we hope that they can, as they have already been approached and they have already accepted. So we look forward to everyone that can join us on August 21st. We aim to start on time, 5:30 to 7:30, and we're over time now. So we're going to thank everybody for tuning in, and especially to our panelists for coming. If we could have a hand, please. And so, again, we'll see you on August 21st. Aloha. Mahalo. I apologize for no ladies. Oh, oh, that is the first day.
So what we'll be doing is we'll be advertising the students that this is taking place as well. So
Oh, so are they gonna be here? So are we gonna have like, more activity and
Again.
livelihood?
I don't know how to use FaceTime,
Okay.
sorry.
Is she still on?
Right.
I'm like, sorry, Maria.
So we may have to be a smaller group.
I hope not. Okay, I'm gonna hang you up and